this being broadcast?
Thank you.
No,
That's nice.
we have via Zoom.
We had
for
Southwest pretty
He's-
clear,
okay.
so, you know, we've got
We're going to call the meeting to order. We'll say the pledge before the city council meeting. Tonight, we're here to have a joint workshop with Urban Renewal. And I want
I'm just
to-
turning it down right now.
What's that?
I'm just turning it down right now.
And I want, who's on Zoom for us, Shannon?
We have Jerry on Zoom, Jerry Bazell, and then one of the presenters are on
Presenters.
Zoom.
Okay, so from P&Z, from Urban Renewal, it's Jerry.
Yes.
And we've got Ms. Fleischman, Ms. Davis, we've got Mr. Crosby, Mr. Clemenson. Diane, who are we? Oh, Larry Carsonson, is he going to participate?
I don't believe he is, and
Okay.
then Colin Coles isn't.
Colin Coles, okay, so we'll show those as being absent or excused, as the case may be. And Mr. Malloy probably won't make it tonight, health issues. And Mr. Wolf called and let me know that he will be joining us a few minutes late. So other than that, all council members are present. So tonight, we're talking about the Pleasantview Feasibility Study, and Mr. Seal, we'll turn it over to you.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce it, and then Matt Gillis from Welch Comer will take over from there. And I know that Matt Anderson from Heartland is also on Zoom, and he will be covering some of the financial end of it. So welcome, council members and mayor, Urban Renewal Agency. Glad you're all here. Glad you're here to see where we're going with this. I know that we've presented to you guys with various pieces of this throughout the process.
Bob, can I interrupt one moment?
Absolutely.
Does Jerry have access to this screen? Is he
Yes.
able, he's able to see
It
it?
should be. This is on Zoom.
Yeah.
I just want to confirm that Jerry's got,
Yes, yes, I can see you just fine, thank you.
thank you. Go ahead, Bob.
Of course, if I could advance the slides, that would be awesome.
She said click on the PowerPoint with the mouse.
It's amazing technology. Okay. All right. So as a reminder, so here we are, the Pleasantview Corridor. It is a strategic corridor between I-90 and State Highway 53. The district that we're looking at does have a railroad access point, and a big part of this project is a potential for a transload station up off of Pleasantview. You know, we're right by Washington State. We have to be able to, we are trying to compete with the Spokane Valley and the industrial land that has been established over there and has been making great strides in their own development. You know, we believe that is a great timing for this development, for this corridor to come through. The partnership with the potential transload facility really does help to anchor this district. They've already brought in a couple of partners, essentially partners that have located down near I-90 access, near the Love's trucking facility. We did go through the eligibility study, and it does meet the requirements per the Idaho Code. And we kind of currently lack a type of industrial hub. We have certain industrial districts within the city, but this would allow access to much greater acreage within that industrial area in order for the city to develop and expand the options within industrial and commercial type of developments along this corridor. The district size is about 600 acres. That includes the public right-of-way. There's 552 acres when you look at the parcels alone. These range in size from about 4.5 acres to 68 acres. And actually 68 acres is the project site that initiated this discussion about a little over 2 years ago. They came in and began talking with city staff. And I'm going to go ahead and let Matt take over from here so that he can go through the rest of the analysis that was done by Welch Comer and Heartland. And Matt, you go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Well, good evening, council members, board members. Matt Gillis, Welch Comer Engineers. As I'm going to finish out just some general statistics. I thought this slide was helpful to help the crowd understand, or the audience understand, the amount of industrial versus the amount of residential and commercial, and then the school site. Obviously, most of it, the majority of it is industrial, which is one of the reasons we're here talking about it. As Bob mentioned, we covered the eligibility study, so we're beyond that, now we're in the financial feasibility. But before we can determine if it is financially feasible, there's a bunch of steps that we have to take. And forgive me if this is old news to you, but the first thing we needed to do was confirm the boundary that was talked about during the eligibility phase. Lots going on, talking with developers here and there. This parcel's in, this parcel's out. So once we settled on that, once the boundary stopped moving, we started thinking about if this corridor was going to develop, how will it develop? Which parcels will go first? What's the sequencing? I'm not going to say it's a crystal ball method of doing it, but we used our knowledge of the area, knowledge of the current market, and then our real estate experts, Heartland, who will speak in just a moment. Once we determined the phasing that we think will happen, we looked at 3 different options. Then we have to figure out, well, how do we service these parcels with utilities? Because, as you know, utilities are very expensive. Then and only then, once we nail all that down, can we figure out if this whole thing pencils, both from an overall standpoint, does the district in its life generate more increment than we need to spend on infrastructure? And also, can we figure out a way to get phase 1, the phase 1 improvements, which I'll talk about in just a moment, out of the gate? So as I mentioned, we looked at 3 different scenarios as far as how it will develop. So scenario 1, we started very basic, and I think you can see that. So north is up. Whoops. Where's my little light? North is up. This is Celtice at the south end, Prairie at the north end, and Highway 53 right up here. So phase 1 assumed we would develop from south to north slowly. So over the years, it's real easy from an infrastructure standpoint because the source of our infrastructure is in Celtice. And when I say infrastructure, I mean primarily the water and sewer. And so as development happens, we build as we go north. Okay. Transload is this one that just highlighted. And then north of Prairie is the Copper Basin Steve White property that is somewhat of a mixed use. So that was scenario 1. Not likely it'll occur in that manner, but we wanted to look at it. Scenario 2, which is ultimately what we analyzed through the financial portion of it, scenario 2 starts with transload. We have a bird in the hand right now. People are ready to go. Shortly after that, since we're going to run, if we need to get infrastructure to, I'll turn this way for you. We need to get infrastructure to the transload facility, which will come up the Pleasantview Corridor to and through the parcel, which sets up the next phases and this could develop any number of ways, but those group of parcels will likely develop because they all of a sudden have the ability to hook up to water and sewer. And then maybe the school, which is this parcel here. It's in the district, but it doesn't generate increment. Then after that, we foresee it developing from north to south, from there towards Celtice Way. And it's okay if some of those swap a little bit. The overall analysis will be similar. And then finally, we looked at scenario 3, where again, the northern parcels go first. So same thing, we still need to run infrastructure all the way up through the corridor to serve these folks, which is very expensive. But that development goes first, then transload, then we start to build from north to south again. As I mentioned, the scenario we think is most likely to occur is scenario 2. And from here forward, that's what we've modeled, is scenario 2. So from the detail of the infrastructure, and I'm going to be not too detailed, it'd be really boring for you, but I've turned the map, 90 degrees clockwise. So north is to the right. Pleasantview is here, Celtice, and Prairie. So from an infrastructure standpoint, we'll start with the transportation stuff. So one of the goals with the analysis is how do we get phase 1 off the ground? So how do we keep people safe, get service, utility service to everybody, and build phase one to get the transload facility on board and going. So from a transportation standpoint, we've limited it to what are the safety improvements that have to be done to keep people safe. From a capacity standpoint, widening roads, that type of thing, some of those costs have been deferred into subsequent phases when increment is available. So from a transportation standpoint, the minimum that we believe is responsible is an intersection improvement here, because remember, this is going to develop out. They'll spend several million to develop that. So intersection improvements, whether that's a traffic signal, just turn lanes, or a roundabout, we don't yet know because it hasn't been designed. It'll be illuminated, and then the frontage improvements along Grange, I should have mentioned that, this is Grange, would be constructed as well. So that's the roadway improvement part of the infrastructure cost. From a water standpoint, remember the only source of the water is down in Celtice Way, so we're going to proposing to run I believe it was a 16-inch water main from Celtice up to the transload. 18-inch, sorry. 18-inch. Which is consistent with the city's master plan. We went round and round to try to figure out a more cost-effective way to do this first phase of the water, because it is very expensive. But working closely with staff, both in the engineering and public works department, it was determined to just stick with the planned water line. So water main, 18-inch water main in Pleasantview. Frontage improvements, since we're doing the roadway improvements, we need to get the water line under there. And then there is an interconnect somewhere in this area between the city of Post Falls and East Green Acres for emergencies. From a sewer standpoint, the plan to get transload on board and served is to run a pressure sewer. Well, first start with a pretty substantial lift station just north of Prairie, which is needed anyway. That's going to be a large lift station that'll end up draining a very large portion of North Post Falls. And so get that done in phase one, build a pressure sewer, 6-inch, 8-inch, something like that, we don't know yet, along the entire corridor into Celtice Way, again, because that's where the existing utilities are. So just like the water, that'll provide service to transload, and it'll set up the development to the north. While we're there, since we will be installing and crossing the railroad, the plan is to also install what will eventually be a 14-inch pressure sewer along the whole corridor. But because of the challenges with railroad permitting, we want to get that done when we're there anyways. So that's why the small portion is in phase one. And then like the water line, we will build a gravity sewer along in Grange, consistent with the frontage improvements along the south end of the transload facility. So those are the minimum utilities and roadway improvements we think can be done with phase one. Ultimately though, when this is all built out, everything will be serviced. So there'll be the pressure and gravity sewers in Pleasantview, because there's high spots and low spots. There's also another lift station that'll be constructed near Lark. The side streets will have their own roadway, water, and sewer extensions as well. And then some improvements to water north of Prairie and then east of Pleasantview. I know you can't see this table. That's okay. I only showed it just to demonstrate that the time and effort put into the cost estimate was substantial, and there was a lot of moving parts. Phases switched around. When do we do this? When do we do that? So there's a lot of detail here, but you can see the cost of the phases. We whittled and whittled, and our focus was on phase one at $6.8 million. And if there are no questions for me, I think I was going to turn it over to Matt Anderson. Matt, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Matt, hang on 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Any questions, of Matt, before we turn it over? Anybody in urban renewal questions at this point? And I would say, anyone in urban renewal, if you do have a question, throw your hand up, we'll have you come up to the podium. Okay?
And Matt, let me know when you want me to advance a slide.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I'm going to say hi to everybody, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben Wharton, as he has been doing the heavy lifting on this from the start. So, Ben, dive in.
All right, so what you're looking at here is the output of our financial model, which projects tax increment revenues over the 20-year life of the Pleasantview district. As Matt mentioned, the phase one to kickstart this entire effort will cost $6.8 million, and that's running sewer and water, primarily running sewer and water up Pleasantview to the intersection of Pleasantview and Prairie. And that'll unlock transload, that'll unlock the Crystal Creek parcel to the north, and then hopefully catalyze a pretty robust, development pattern over the next 20 years. One of the negative portion of the chart that you're looking at on the front end for that first 8 years, that's the payback period for, we looked at different levels of either grant funding or some other source that would defray the initial $6.8 million cost. And what remains, we project would start to get paid back over a period of approximately 8 years. And we looked at different levels of funding, but what you're looking at here assumes that 25% of the 6.8 million, is funded through grants or some other means. It's a 20-year life. After phase one, phases 2, 3, and 4 of the infrastructure investment would be funded out of tax revenues. So we're not assuming any funding after phase one. And then it's probably tough to see, but in the bottom right corner of this graphic is the timing assumptions for each of the critical areas of the district. So we looked at like transload facility obviously is an important one, and one of the key drivers for setting up the district in the first place, but also the industrial along Pleasantview is another category, the industrial along Prairie, and then we have 2 mixed use zones, both of which are important and contribute to overall district revenues. One is the residential mixed zone, and the other is community commercial mixed. And we have sort of slightly different absorption and development assumptions for each of those areas that we built into our model, and you're seeing kind of the output here. But in general, at the end of the life of the district, even we think the assumptions are, especially on the industrial side, quite conservative for reasons we'll explain. We still project a surplus after funding phases 1 through 4 of the infrastructure over the 20-year period. The development pattern, as Matt alluded to, really sort of emanates outward from that intersection of Pleasantview and Prairie. So as he said, what happens along Pleasantview, we modeled development occurring from north to south, but that could happen, piecemeal or south to north, or kind of a mix of the two. It doesn't really matter as long as the pace of development unfolds, as we projected, and it is a very conservative assumption that I'll get into. Transload obviously is a key parcel. That's the big parcel 9, kind of in the middle of the map there, and then near that, just to the northeast of that intersection of Pleasantview and Prairie, are parcels 11, 12, and 25. If you can't see them, it's basically kind of running along that edge of Prairie up into the Crystal Creek parcel. Those are all mixed use zones. We've made some assumptions around what we did talk to the developer, and it's hard to tell at this point what exactly will go there, but it could be some mix of, flex, industrial, multifamily, office even. It's hard to tell, but we assumed what we think is a realistic mix of uses on the commercial mixed use zone. Absorption, I guess the most important assumption here, because so much of the land in the district is zoned for industrial use, we made sure to take an especially conservative approach to absorption and development intensity for the industrial properties. So basically, we assumed, a status quo pace of development for industrial. As you may know, owner users are active in kind of the Bighorn Industrial Park area, and they're developing at about 20% lot coverage. And so the model assumes that that type of activity is happening. One owner user comes into the district every 2 years, which is about what's been happening without all the infrastructure investment. So we're hopeful and optimistic that not only will the utilities allow owner users and others to develop at a higher intensity than 20% lot coverage, but also that it'll happen a little bit faster. So, but we don't want to count on that for the sake of the financial projection. So that's what we assumed. You can see for the commercial zone, which is just to remind everyone while we're not looking at the map, that's just northeast of Prairie and Pleasantview. And we assumed a mix of 25% multifamily, 25% commercial office, and then 50% industrial flex, which again is biased towards lower value uses. If to the extent that mix were to change, towards more multifamily, towards more commercial office, the increment revenues would actually improve. But again, we wanted to stay that the commercial mixed use represents a decent chunk of land area, and so we wanted to stay conservative there as well. And then with the residential mixed use area, we assumed after talking to Copper Basin, without any of this happening, they probably would have developed single family at a density of 4 units to the acre, so quarter-acre lots. But with the mixed use zoning, we assumed they'd probably do something a little bit higher intensity. So, it might be could be a mix of attached and detached, some townhome in there, but we figured it would blend to 8 units to the acre on average, which again, we think is realistic given the zoning there. So for the feasibility report, we looked at, it's important to step back and say, how much of this is building out? Are we assuming 100% of this gets built out, 20%? Our base case scenario, given the absorption details I just shared with you, is about 46% built out over the 20-year life of the district, which we felt was a safe assumption. Again, the key driver is the rate of given the amount of industrial land. That's something we'll definitely pay close attention to. And if it increases even a little bit over what over what is a status quo assumption, things could get a lot better, but we don't want to count on that. Key parcels in the district, obviously parcel 9, the transload facility at kind of the southeast corner of Pleasantview and Prairie, that's a really critical parcel. The whole idea of getting the phase 1 investment done and allowing them to build their facility is that that'll be kicking off quite a bit of tax revenue early in the district's life, and really is a meaningful portion of the overall revenue picture. So parcel 9 is really important. And then the other two sort of significant parcels that we should all watch is parcel 11 and parcel 24, and those are two that are to the northeast of the Pleasantview and Prairie intersection. One's a commercial mixed zone and one's a residential mixed zone, but they just are relatively large parcels, and they we assume they start to develop fairly early, not as early as transload, but within a few years. Once Copper Basin has the utilities that they need at that corner, assuming there's market demand for any of the uses that we mentioned, there's no reason for them not to get started right away. And those two parcels are parcels to watch as well. And if they, for some reason they don't develop as fast, or something else happens, other parcels will have to fill in. But we just wanted to highlight sort of the key, some of the key parcels that go into the revenue projection.
Hey, Ben, for the audience, back on the build-out assumption of 46%, you mentioned that was conservative. Can you give us a feel for how conservative that is? And in your experience, the likelihood of development happening either more dense than 46% or at a faster pace than you assumed?
Well, I think again, with industrial being the focus of this district, at 58% of total land area, the idea that development would not happen at a higher intensity than is currently happening, which is what we modeled. So in other words, like when you think about development intensity, lot coverage ratio is a key assumption. So normally, you'd see lot coverage somewhere in the 30 to 40% neighborhood for an industrial property. And here it's about half that. And one of the limitations is around, again, services, limiting the amount of employees you can have on site, et cetera. So with the infrastructure investment, I would be surprised if you didn't see folks start to build at greater than 20% lot coverage, which is what's happening currently without any of those services. So it's being able to rely on a status quo assumption that doesn't assume any infrastructure investment at all, and still showing a surplus at the end of the district life within the industrial segment, we feel is a very, very, very comfortable place to be. The key, with the mixed use zones, again, I sort of, I think I calculated in one of the slides, how much in practical terms, how much development that actually is. So, it's 30,000 feet of any of those uses I mentioned, whether it be multifamily or commercial office or flex industrial, which again is a fairly modest, and that's an annual number. And then again, on the residential mixed, 20 units per year, which is also, quite slow, I think. So both of those, all of those assumptions, and again, it hits from the amount of industrial we have in the district, and then those two key parcels are both, parcel 24 and parcel 11 being the mixed use parcels. If it were to, the pace, I think, is because it's such a key driver, we're sure to be extremely conservative on it. And I'd be surprised if it went that slowly, especially on the industrial side after the infrastructure investment that happens in phase one. So hopefully that's helpful context. I don't know how much so this is what you're seeing here in the graphic at the end is you're looking at the Crystal Creek parcel, and there's a rezone proposal in process right now, and we assumed that the rezone would occur, and that's our projection was based off of that. So the parcels in red are the commercial mixed use zones, and in yellow is the residential mixed, and then in gray is industrial. So that's obviously a key assumption that went into our analysis, is that this rezone actually does happen. And then we sort of already covered this already, but I list out what could drive positive changes to the revenue picture for the district. The foremost of which is the industrial development pace and intensity. If more multifamily were to go into the commercial mixed use zone, that would drive a much higher increment revenue. And same thing with single family. If it were, if you started to see a lot of townhomes going here, for example, or anything north of 8 units to the acre would make a huge difference in terms of increment revenues. And at this point, all our all are realistic. We sort of, yeah.
Hey, Ben, I have a question for you. I know this is just a feasibility study and it's not zoning or subdivision approval, et cetera. But we continue to hear that residential is not compatible with industrial. And we're looking at the yellow, which is the residential, surrounded on two sides by industrial. So from a feasibility standpoint, how feasible is it? And if you proceed under this assumption, should we anticipate that we're going to see changes in that in the future, and would that have any kind of an impact on your financial feasibility study?
Yeah, so it's a good question. As far as how you would screen or otherwise create separation between the residential and the industrial is an important consideration. And then, how intense and noisy are those uses? That's another one. I don't know if Matt, you have any thoughts on how that would play out?
Yeah, I think part of the mitigating factor here is this is all under control of one developer who is planning it, is asked for this zoning, and is unlikely to create an incompatible adjacency because it would be to their own detriment, in trying to get these properties built. So part of our assumption is that their own self-interest will guide the design and layout. And the other part is that industrial takes a lot of different forms. So, it could be flex industrial where it's the office in the front and the, high bay space in the back. It's actually akin to a retail or a business park type of environment. There's no reason why that can't be designed in a way that would be compatible with townhouses or multifamily. In fact, we see that all over the place. So I wouldn't necessarily think of it as heavy industrial, like a aggregates yard or some sort of heavy activity, in so much as it could be fairly benign, office type of environment.
Thank you.
So one final slide that we added after a meeting earlier today is, and this is in your packets, but just to give all the members and the audience an understanding of, so this is the cost versus funding summary of just phase one, right? Scenario 2, phase 1, just to get transload on board and then set up the parcels to the north. So the table on the left is the costs. So that number should look familiar, 6.8 million. And the table on the right, this is at least the preliminary, we'll call it the funding recipe, to make this project whole. Do you want to speak to that? You know more detail about that.
Absolutely. Bob Steele, Community Development Director. So pretty much we've been looking at the various potential funding options over the course of this process. And this was one of the preliminary areas or ideas that we came up with and have gone through over and over again. The project drive was provided with the potential for an opportunity fund grant through Idaho Department of Commerce, which is the initial $500,000, which can go towards infrastructure for the project. The district is anticipated in collecting approximately $1.2 to $1.5 million in annexation funds that are paid out as properties begin to be developed. So we are proposing that we pull $1 million from the annexation funds in order to put it towards this project. The water department already had $782,000 that had been approved for a water infrastructure piece related to this project that was punching the water line underneath the railroad tracks down by Celtice. So we considered that allocation because it is part of this project towards this funding. The wastewater department has approximately $1.596 million that is typically put towards these types of improvements within the city. So we felt that it was applicable to this project, this overall development as well. And then the final piece is kind of a combination of where are we going to find these remaining $2.9 million. And working with the developer, working with the Urban Renewal Agency, and considering other grant options that are out there and available, to apply for, we determined that they would basically be best funded and just best considered going, through those various options. We are going to be seeking a build grant, which is the big grant, and if we win that, then it's, covered and we're done. To a certain degree with a lot of work, but and then there is an EDA grant that we will also pursue if we do not receive the build grant opportunity. Grant through that process, which can be approximately $2 to $3 million, which would help with this as well. And then the remainder is still kind of up in the air as to the developer will cover some. The Urban Renewal Agency will be potentially seeking financing options. And between the three different routes, we believe that we can meet all this and be able to get this kicked off and begin seeing increment build within the district. So,
Questions, Bob, on that? Oh, go ahead.
Bob, do you see any potential tax increase to citizens? Do you see us down the road going, we need to do a tax increase to pay for this?
no, I do not. I mean, it's as typical development within Idaho. We work on development, paying for development. This is within this district. All the improvements that are being proposed will be paid for through this district, and that we do not see a tax increase due to this. No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Steve?
So Bob, I have a question on the grants you announced. What are the timelines on those?
So the build grant, the notification of funding opportunity was just released, and that grant is due in July, and we hope to hear a result from that sometime in the fall, October, maybe November, and that is for a $25 million, well, $23 to $25 million grant. The EDA grant is on a rolling basis, and it takes about 5 to 6 months to find out whether or not you receive that grant. But because they're both federal and you can't use the funds from one for this, you can't get funded twice. We will basically decide to apply for the EDA grant when we find out whether or not we got the build grant. If we get the build grant, we won't apply for the EDA. If we don't get the build grant, which it is very competitive, it is a national grant, and they are big ticket items typically. But we did apply last year, and we did receive feedback on that from Department of Transportation, and it was very, it was a good review, and we feel confident that it's worth our time to put in for the grant again. So,
Well, and just to remind everybody, the time frame that staff completed that application in was extremely short.
Yeah.
typically, yeah, absolutely. That type of grant, typically you want to put in about 3 months or more worth of time in to put it together, and our staff and Project Drive group did it in about 3 weeks. So.
Any other questions, Bob, Matt, Ben?
And I was just going to say one other piece to this whole project is the fact that the school district does own a piece of property up there, approximately 60 acres, I believe, that is intended to be the second high school site for Post Falls. And after recently talking with the superintendent, it does look like that will be a school site that will be needed within the next number of years. So it is a key piece to being able to continue to, keep up with everything. So.
Okay. Anything else to add?
No, I think you did a great job of explaining, both Matt and Bob and Matt and Ben.
Jerry, are you all right?
Yes, sir, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Crosby?
I would just say that the commission and Diane and I particularly have worked very closely with staff on this. We've and with the consultants. We feel it's a very feasible project. I think we're already starting to see economic activity as a result of this particular employer coming in. We have Kenmore, which is Kenworth, which is building right now in one of our existing urban renewal districts, which will close in the next 2 years. And all of that increment will go back to the city and the other taxing entities. And I think the assumptions have been as conservative as staff has presented. And I think we feel very comfortable that this is going to be I know for years, I've talked to Linda, I've talked to you when you were on councilman. We've seen the potential of this corridor, and I think this is the opportunity to realize it. So,
Good.
thank you.
Appreciate the work Urban Renewal's done on this as well.
And Mr. Mayor, I included in the packet kind of a benefit memo. I don't know if you guys have any questions on that. It was just basically talking about the benefits of the district, the benefits of Project Drive, and the number of agencies that the city has coordinated with in order to make this entire urban renewal district and project happen in Post Falls. So I can answer any questions if you had any on that memo.
Well, that's good. Any questions of Shelley? Good. So we don't need, obviously, any action at this point. It'll come back to us.
Only if you wanted any changes or something along those
Well,
lines.
again, I think it's important to note that this is a financial feasibility study. This isn't approval of any development at this point, so that will all come forth in the normal course of business.
Right, and what will happen with this is it's going to be incorporated into the urban renewal plan that the urban renewal agency is in the process of drafting, and that will be coming back to the council.
Good.
It will come back on June 1st as a public hearing. If, it has to go through planning and zoning first, and then it would come back to council on June 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to state that, as Lynn Crosby said, we've been looking at this corridor for about 10 years, trying to figure out how we could get sewer up there to get some industrial business going up there. And as you guys know, I am on Jobs Plus for Mayor Jacobson. And Jobs Plus says that Project Drive will bring 1,250 jobs to Post Falls. Now, a lot of those are going to move from where they're at now. But we will get new jobs. We'll obviously get sales tax. We'll obviously get state tax. I know that Jobs Plus has worked really, really hard with Project Drive and with the city, with the governor's office, the Department of Commerce, like Bob said, Kootenai County, Post Falls Highway District, and then again, Dina Nacarado at the school district. So I don't see how this isn't a feasible plan. So I just wanted to make my thoughts known about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you stated, we are seeing some development out there, some businesses coming in, Bighorn Industrial Park, all on septic. And, you know, if we can get sewer out and get people out of the septics and into our sewer system, I think that's good for the environment. So hopefully it'll have a positive impact.
Yeah.
I'll mention the other company, Kenworth was mentioned by Lynn Crosby, but Western Trailer has closed on their property, and they will be located by Kenworth out there in the same Watson project that's out on the west side of town.
What's interesting is when Project Drive not first started, but when they talked to us, we met one evening and they stated, you know, they wanted to come to Post Falls, and they said, we'll bring other affiliated companies with us. And Kenworth and
Western
Trailers, their CEOs were both there. And Kenworth beat Project Drive to the punch. He says, we're coming. So I think that's a good location on the west part of town. I think that's a good spot for industrial. Again, if we can get the infrastructure to them, and as Linda says, we've been trying to figure out how to get the infrastructure to them, and I think these are good plans. Urban Renewal is a big assistance. Grants will be a big help, especially if we are successful in obtaining that builds grant. That would be huge. So, you know, I think the future looks good out in that area, and I think we can develop it in a proper manner.
I'll speak just a brief moment to the complication of this. And we talked about this morning in a meeting we held, and Matt did an excellent job of explaining the infrastructure up there. It's a very complicated plan, and for staff and Welch-Comer and Urban Renewal to come together and come up with and I'll say Ray Kimball also assisted with this, in coming up with a phasing plan that works and getting it down to that 6.8 million is phenomenal. I mean, it's really something that, as we started into this, we weren't sure we could accomplish. And so while it seems like a simple plan, it's a very sophisticated plan, and it took a lot of very intelligent individuals sitting down to figure it out. And so hats off to those folks for being able to do it.
Appreciate everyone's efforts on it.
I think it started in excess of 10 million. So going through that process, it really, for that phase one, so a lot of work was done.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
With that, I will adjourn this meeting, and we will reconvene in